Are you ready to learn more Spanish? This is a continuation of the previous lesson that was also called Adjectives, Pronouns, and Adverbs, but that was lesson 5, part 1. This is lesson 6, part 2. Now, we didn't really talk about adverbs at all last lesson, so I'm going to make up for that and talk a lot about adverbs this lesson. Actually, not a lot, maybe a slide and a half. But we'll also still talk about some adjectives and pronouns. So without further ado, here we go. So first thing we want to talk about adjectives is that they usually follow a noun, but some precede a noun. We talked about adjectives way back in lesson 1, and we talked about it last time too, but we usually said it follows a noun, and it usually does. For example, el gato negro, the black cat. There are some instances where adjectives precede a noun, and that's what we'll be talking about right now. Main one, bueno, malo. Bueno means good, malo means bad. They're sort of opposites, but they function in the same way. An example is buenos dias. You've probably heard this before. It means good day. Notice that this is bueno, this is buenos. It's just because, remember, as we talked about in our first lesson, adjectives depend on the number and gender of the noun. So since dias is masculine plural, buenos is the masculine plural form of bueno. Now we're going to get into a whole list of adjectives. So I'm not going to give examples for each one. I'll verbally give some examples for a few of them, but only the most common ones. So mucho, a lot. For example, muchos gracias. Thank you very much. A lot of things, etc. Poco, a little. Same with bueno, malo. It's sort of opposites, but they function in the same way. Bastante is enough. For example, bastante arroz, enough rice. Ambos is both. And this is one's not that common. Most people use los dos instead. And that is usually when you already know what you're talking about. So for example, ¿quieres camisas? Or let's say there are 2 shirts actually, and you know that there are 2 shirts. That's when you would use los dos. For example, ¿quieres dos camisas? In interculation. You really want 2 shirts? And then you respond saying, sí, quiero los dos. Yes, I want both. You can also use ambos. You would say, quiero ambas camisas. Cada is each. For example, cada día, each day. Varios is several. Alguno is some. Now I'm going to talk about alguno next lesson, affirmatives and negatives, etc. But alguno is irregular. You don't sort of, you know how you change a verb, an adjective, depending on the noun, like masculine, feminine, singular, plural. I just talked about that a few minutes ago. For alguno, you do something different when you change it. And I'll be talking about that next lesson. If you're really curious, just search it up and be prepared to memorize yet another rule in Spanish. Otro is an other. So for example, it's also another, for example. You can use otro vez, another time, other time. Todos, every. And now other, or otro, if you just want to use the word we just learned. Some other adjectives that precede a noun. So próximo is next, único is only, and último is last. Usually they refer to items in a series. For example, próximo is próximo día, next day. Últimos, último día, last day, for example, work. That's kind of depressing because unless you're going into retirement, oh well. Único is only. And you might use this for único hijo, only child. And then adjectives whose meaning depends on position. So antiguo, that can either mean former or ancient. You don't want to call your former best friend an ancient friend. I mean, you might if you're no longer friends, of course, but it's just something to keep in mind. Cierto, certain or sure. This one doesn't really change the meaning that much. Grande is like antiguo. You don't want to say you had a big time when you had a great time. Pobre, similar. You don't want to say that a depressed person is without money, poor, basically, instead of calling him unfortunate. Mismo is same or itself. Again, like cierto, it doesn't really change the meaning much. And viejo, long time or old. This one is a major one because if you're talking to a friend you've had for a long time, you'd rather call him a long-time friend than an old friend, meaning that he is old. Even though, let's just say he's in the middle of his life, like 40 years old, you do not want to call him an old friend. Maybe then you can use antiguo after he gets insulted. Then you can call him a former friend. Okay, finally into adverbs. I know you all have been waiting for this. An adverb is basically a word that describes an adjective, verb, or other adverb. So example is slowly. That's in English. And let's break this up. Slow is the adjective part of it. No, it's not right. Okay. Adjective part of it. And this is the suffix. Now, pause and make a prediction. What you think it'll be like for Spanish. Okay, you made a prediction? Guess what? In Spanish, you also have two parts, an adjective and the suffix. In Spanish, however, the suffix is mente, not li, but mente. So you would use your adjective part and then mente. Let's say slowly. Slow in Spanish is lento / a, and then add an s if it's plural. This is usually the form of most adjectives. It'll be o / a and then have an s in parentheses in case it's plural. But it's saying the feminine form, usually. So you use lentamente. So the word would be lentamente, slowly. It's a really fun word to say, actually. If you have two adverbs in a series, only the second one will take a mente. There isn't really an example for this because you won't encounter it much. But if you do, for example, in a Spanish class, you were asked to write two adverbs in a series. Make sure the first one is just the adjective in feminine form, and the second one is the adverb. So those are irregular adverbs. Now we'll be talking about irregular ones. Of quantity first. Mucho is a lot. This was also an adjective. Tanto is so much. For example, if you have so much running to do or so much working, you're working so much, that sounds better, then you use tanto. Poco is a little. Casi is almost. Más is more. We talked about this, I believe. Menos is less. Yes, we talked about these in our time lesson. I believe in the second lesson, was it? Yes, with the vocabulary. Now we'll go into it a bit more. They're basically like more rice, less rice. We talked about this in the superlative and comparative lesson too, last lesson actually, when we were talking about adjectives and comparing them. More friendly is an example of having two adverbs. In this case, the first adverb, more, is irregular, so that doesn't count in what we talked about earlier. But if you really want an example, any Spanish textbook that goes into adverbs would have it. Desmiado, meaning too much. And then irregular adverbs of time and place. A veces, meaning sometimes. Ahora, meaning now. This is pretty common. For example, if someone's bugging you, you say, I'm sleeping now. Ahora mismo, meaning right now. So if you're really mad at someone and you really want to talk to them, then you would say, come here right now. Ahora mismo. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. Siempre is always. Todavía still. Like, I'm still eating, I'm still sleeping. Ya is already, like, I'm already rich. Ya no is no longer. For example, I'm no longer rich. Temprano is early, either early morning it could be, or early youth. Tarde is late, basically the opposite of temprano. And then I'm going to go into a few adverbs of place. There's more on the next slide. First one is a la derecha, to the right. A la izquierda, to the left, and derecho, straight. We talked about these last three in our second lesson with colors and common adjectives and basically vocabulary. So some more adverbs of place. Aquí is here, allí is there, cerca is nearby, en lo alto, meaning up. Lejos is far off, like basically the opposite of cerca. Adelante is in front, al fondo is at the bottom, like at the bottom of the lake. Atrás is in the back. Arriba is up, or you can even say upstairs is arriba. Abajo is down or downstairs. Adentro is inside. Afuera is outside. So I'm not really giving examples for these, except like for lejos, cerca. You can say close to the building, far from the building. You can basically, these are adverbs that are sort of relative position. Except for allí and aquí, they're relative, close to you, basically. Like it's here next to me, it's there far from me. Nearby is relative, up is relative, far off, in front, at the bottom, everything is relative. Even if you're on the second floor, that means first floor would be downstairs for you. So it's all relative. And then relative pronouns. Speaking of relative, so a relative pronoun basically is a pronoun-ish word that connects two phrases. For example, que. You can use that to say that, which, who. So for example, the bird that ate the insect. So half of the words in that you probably wouldn't know because it's vocabulary. But for that, you would use the bird, write that in Spanish, que, that ate the insect. Write that in Spanish. Again, ate is in past tense, and we didn't cover that yet. We only did present tense. That's why I'm not translating the full sentence into Spanish. This is also used after prepositions like de que, of that, or of which. Quien is who. So que also is who, but quien is if you're specifically talking who. Like the man who wanted to come to my house. This is mainly used when ser is in the main clause. So if you're saying he is the man who wanted to come to my house, then you would mainly use quien. Now, you've probably never seen cuyo before. Cuyo, cuya, cuyos, cuyas. That's whose. Lo que is that which. These ones are not as common, so I'm not going through them in depth. Lo que usually refers to an abstract idea, unlike que and quien, who are like man or bird or something concrete. El que, la que, los que, las que is that, which, who, the ones, who, that, basically a lot of stuff. Sort of like que, except it's more specific because it has the gender involved. So the man who wanted to come to my house, you can use el que. Or the woman who wanted to come to my house, you can say la que. El cual, la cual, los cual, las cual. Again, it's that, which, or who, sort of like que, except it includes gender too. And number, actually. If you want to say the men who wanted to come to my house, you would say los que. Comparative adjectives. So actually, last lesson, we didn't talk about comparative adjectives. That's this lesson. So sorry for the confusion, because if you didn't learn about mas or menos, well, that's what this lesson's for. So first, a comparative adjective. As you can see, everything's here already because this is a bit confusing. And see, like in irregular superlatives, there's article, article, article. You won't know what that means when I'm going through one by one. So here's everything at once. Comparative adjectives is más plus adjective plus que, more than, menos plus adjective plus que, less than, tan plus adjective plus como, same as. So basically when you're comparing adjectives, so more friend, I said more friendly. Friendly is an adverb. So maybe more interesting than, or less interesting than, as interesting as. That's when you're comparing two things using an adjective. Superlatives is when something is the most of. So instead of just saying more interesting than, you say the more or the most interesting of. Similarly, menos is the least of. So el menos interesante de, the least interesting. Irregular comparatives. So those are for regulars. When you have bueno, it turns into mejor. Malo, it turns into peor. Joven, it turns into menor. Viejo, it turns into mayor. Again, you have to memorize these. So you would, for example, say más mejor. Well, for mejor, actually, you wouldn't use the más. You would just say es mejor que. It's more than or better than. These you just have to memorize. Irregular superlatives. Bueno becomes article plus mejores or mejor. Malo is article plus peor. Joven is article plus menor. Viejo is article plus mayor. So basically the comparatives, except you add an article in the front. And then when you compare nouns, so you're comparing things using nouns. So like there are more books than libraries, which should be the case, hopefully. There are less libraries than books. There are as many cars as trucks. And then for comparing verbs, it's not exactly similar, but you would use the verb first. You would say, I run more than I walk, or I walk less than I run, or I run as much as I walk. So again, it's más que, menos que, tanto como. Again, nouns would use tanto como, adjectives would use tan como. But whenever you see tan or tanto, it's como. Whenever you see más or menos, it's que. That's the main thing to remember here. And then, of course, the irregulars. Adjectives and pronouns used as nouns. So in this case, we're still having adjectives and pronouns, but they're being used as nouns. That may seem confusing, so I'll give you an example. Lo plus adjective. So this is a neuter, meaning it has no gender. It's the masculine form of an adjective, and it turns into a noun. So for example, lo de, meaning matter of. So like, let's discuss the matter of the man. Lo antes posible is as soon as possible. So let's discuss it as soon as possible. Los más posible, that'll be, let's discuss the most possible case. Lo más pronto posible, the fastest possible. It's sort of like as soon as possible. And lo menos posible, the least possible. And then when you have a general adjective used as a noun, the modified noun is omitted. So for example, would you like the red or the blue car? ¿Quieres el carro azul o rojo? I know I switched the order of the adjectives, but it doesn't really matter. And then you can reply, quiero el azul. I want the blue one. Except in this case, you just say azul, not azul uno, or that sounds weird. Yes, I know. A pronoun used as a noun. So in this case, the noun is omitted. So you would use an article plus de to indicate possession. So like el de Juan, for example. You can say quiero el carro de Juan or el de Juanita. And then similarly, el que or la que or los que or las que is a description, and it's a relative pronoun. If you remember that from our previous slides. So yes, that's it for today. And that was the part 2 of adjectives, pronouns, and adverbs. Like I said, next lesson will be about affirmatives, negatives, and prepositions. So that will probably be released in a few weeks from now. So I'll see you next time.